Hail and well met, everyone. Ruan Apton here, member of the Kilcan Gwyn, and a fairy traditionalist. So today we're beginning a new video. We're going to start working on the audiobook for Dr. John Grigsby. His book is called Warriors of the Wasteland, a quest for the pagan sacrificial cult behind the Grail legend. This book was really eye-opening for me and for many other people out there. And since I started working on the audiobook for Ankara Gwyn, I took it upon myself to reach out to John saying, hey, I would love to make an audiobook for Warriors of the Wasteland. Because its information is important. I've noticed it's very important for my own path as a fairy traditionalist. It has filled in so many gaps and so many questions I've had after studying Ankara Gwyn, various fairy folk tales, and his work as an archaeologist is stunning. And so instead of doing my book study, we were going through the tradition of household spirits, ancestral lores, and practices by Claude the Clock too. I decided that I need to get this done. I think it's vital that this is in the hands of even those who are like me, neurodivergent and stuff, having more than just a published book, but being able to listen to the words, to ingest it on a whole new level is vital. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start the recording for Warriors of the Wasteland. So let me go ahead and turn on my computer. I can only record so much at a time because I'm doing this out in my temple. And, well, battery life. So let's go ahead and wait for this to load. But while we're waiting for this to load up, let me go ahead and read the part in the back so you can get an understanding of why this book is so important. It says, in the Grail legends, the wounding of the Fisher King in the thigh with a magic spear blasts the fertility of the land, an enchantment only to be undone by the finding of the mysterious castle he lays and by asking him a certain question. In this exhaustive research work on the ancient Celtic peoples of Northwest Europe, John Grigsby reveals how, behind this medieval tale, lies a dim remembrance of a cult of human sacrifice that forms the backbone of pagan Celtic religion. Tracing the key elements of these rites back to the time of Stonehenge, Grigsby argues that warriors met their deaths reenacting a divine drama rooted in the Bronze Age. And just as in the Grail legend, the land can only be healed by asking the king a question. In his startling conclusion, Grigsby offers convincing evidence that the victims of Celtic sacrifice were used in necromantic oracular rites aimed to bring rebirth to the land. And for those who don't know, John Grigsby took his degree in prehistoric archaeology at the University of Wales, Bangor, followed by his master's in Celtic mythology. This, his first book, represents the results of 10 years' research into the psychology and mythology of the prehistoric Celts. And our dear brother lives in Dale, Kent, England. Now, mind you, my throat hurts because sinuses. And so this will be very touch and go. But if you have any comments and stuff you would like to share, do so below at any time, and we can have discussions on it. So let's test to make sure my sound works. So we'll do a sound test. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So now that we got that, let's go ahead and delete it, and let's get started. Warriors of the Wasteland, a quest for the pagan sacrificial cult behind Grail legend by John Grigsby, published by Watkins Publishing, London. Introduction. Perhaps it was inevitable, having been brought up on a diet of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and thus acquiring a love of fable and landscape, that when at the age of 16 I encountered the legends of Arthur in the form of Marion Zimmer Bradley's novel, The Mists of Avalon, I would be instantly smitten. From then on, I devoured every book I could find on the subject, from classics like Sir Thomas Malory's epic Le Morte d'Arthur to modern retellings such as Mary Stuart's Merlin trilogy and T.H. White's The Once and Future King. What interested me was not so much the question of whether the existence of Arthur could be proven historically, though I thought it probable, but the discovery of something vital about my own and my country's heritage that my formal education had ignored. I'd been taught about Odysseus and Hercules at school, but little mention had been made of Arthur and Sir Lancelot. I knew the tales of Jacob and Moses, but what of Sir Gawain and Guinevere? It was as if our native traditions were deemed less worthy than those of the classic world, as if they occupied a cultural blind spot. Wishing to remedy this one-sidedness, I launched myself, despite my forthcoming exams, into an extracurricular study of native myth that would change not only my choice of further education, but my whole life. My study of native myth opened up a whole new dimension to the landscape in which I lived. I awoke to a land saturated in fable and ancient lore as rich as the dream time of the Australian Aborigines, to whom every feature of the earth had its own story, its own mythical resonance. In my own hometown of Dover, for instance, to my surprise and joy, I discovered a legend that stated that the head of King Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain, had once been kept at Dover Castle, with its grievous wound dealt by Sir Lancelot plainly visible. According to Sir Thomas Malory, the king himself had laid the relic in the castle chapel following Gawain's death during a battle in the harbor. The printer, William Caxton, in his 1485 edition of Malory's epic, supported the author's story by writing in his prologue that in the castle at Dover ye may see Gawain's skull. Caxton, who had worked as a merchant in Bruges, and so had passed through Dover on numerous occasions, was no doubt speaking from experience. But if any such skull had existed, and I saw no reason for Malory and Caxton to lie, to my disappointment, it was no longer on display. Perhaps it had been taken away, hidden, or even destroyed during the Reformation. Many years later, as a custodian at the castle, I could also vouch for the fact that it had not been secreted away somewhere, hidden from the prying eyes of the public. But at the time, its disappearance somehow added to its mystery. Whose skull was it? Had it originally been that of a local saint, or even a martyr, given the vicious wound on its crown? Had this been the case, surely he would have been remembered. His precious relics would not have become attributed to a mythical hero. It was only when I looked deeper into the Arthurian corpus that I was to stumble on some semblance of an answer. The legends surrounding Arthur, the quasi-historical once and future king, I soon discovered, were rooted in traditions from a time far earlier than the Dark Ages in which he was supposed to have lived. Behind the lords and ladies of the Arthurian legends lay, for the most part, the gods and goddesses of a prehistoric Iron Age people called the Celts, whose modern day descendants, the Irish, Welsh, Scots, and Bretons, still speak the ancient tongue that was used in these islands before the coming of the Romans. The witch Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half sister, for instance, was no other than a version of the Irish war goddess Morgan, clothed in medieval dress. And behind noble Sir Gawain lay a Welsh hero named Gwalchmai, the Hawk of May, whom some saw as a solar deity because his strength waxed and waned with the sun. The name Celt, or Keltoi, had first been applied to these people by the Greeks, who used it as a general term to define a number of tribes of northwest Europe, sharing an underlying homogeneity of language, culture, and arguably religion. Archaeologists have argued that these barbarians originated in the Alpine regions around 700 BC and then catalyzed into growth through trade with the civilizations of the Mediterranean, migrated throughout northwest Europe and across the Channel into Britain, overrunning the native population. These historic Celts exerted a great fascination for me, not least because my English education had seemed so dismissive or ignorant of them. British history, I had been taught, began in 55 BC with the arrival of Julius Caesar, who brought the light of civilization to this primitive land. The peoples that the Romans encountered here, according to the conventional image, were little more than savages. It seemed an embarrassingly ignoble start for Britannia that while other nations were building pyramids and debating philosophy, these isles were populated by skin-wearing brutes. This view of the primitiveness of the Celts was no doubt encouraged by the fact that they entered battle naked and painted with blue dye and collected the heads of their foes as trophies, and that their priests, the Druids, were accused by their Roman contemporaries of performing abominable human sacrifices. Many have argued, and continue to do so, that these accusations were unfounded, being nothing more than Roman propaganda to justify the subjugation of the Celts and the annexation of their land. However, the numerous findings dating back to the Iron Age of fatally injured or dismembered human bodies and severed heads uncovered from bogs, lakes, and wells in northwest Europe, such as the body of a man found in a peat bog in Lindell Moss in Cheshire in 1984, who had been killed in a bizarre triple method, seemed to prove that the classical authors were reporting the truth. I found it hard to believe that the people whose myths lay behind the beautiful and haunting legends of Arthur had perpetrated such horrendous crimes. But I could not refute the evidence that lay before me. Although unpalatable, this evidence of sacrificial rites did provide clues to the origin of the Dover skull. With its deep head wound, might it not have belonged to the victim of a Celtic sacrifice? Had this skull, a gory talisman, facing towards the continent, perhaps been placed there in Celtic times to protect the land from invasion? Could this ancient trophy have then been kept at the castle, whose site was thought to have once been a Celtic hill fort, with each successive occupant unwilling to banish the uncanny relic for fear of supernatural reprisals? This was the case with so many so called screaming skulls associated with old buildings. The research that I undertook to find an answer to such questions would revolutionize my earlier view of the Iron Age Britons and their ancestors. Far from being uncivilized troglodytes, the ancient prehistoric population of these isles belonged to a unique cultural tradition that had arisen independent of Greece and Rome on the Atlantic coast of Britain, France, Spain, and Denmark, areas linked through maritime contacts since Neolithic times. This zone was a center of innovation and culture long before the establishment of the great city-states of the Mediterranean. The breathtaking monuments of these indigenous megalithic structures predated the pyramids of Egypt, and their stone circles, once credited to the Romans or Phoenicians, showed a precise knowledge of astronomy and mechanics that shattered any belief that they had been erected by savages. What's more, archaeologists began to argue that the Celts had not arrived in Britain with their language during the Iron Age, but were the descendants of the indigenous population of the Atlantic coast, whose language and unique culture had developed in those regions over the thousands of years that they had been in contact with each other. Such a view explains Caesar's hitherto puzzling observation that the Druidic religion had originated not on the continent, as would be expected if the Celts had sprung up in the Alps, as previously thought, but in Britain, and that those wishing to learn more of this system of knowledge traveled there to study it. The Druids, it seemed increasingly possible, were the direct heirs to the knowledge possessed by the builders of Stonehenge. Suddenly, statements in classical sources that refer to the Druids' possession of a body of lore akin to the teachings of Pythagoras do not seem so unlikely. Was it possible that there had once been a light burning in the north before being extinguished by Rome? That there once existed the glimmerings of a civilization to rival those of the classical world, but which had been forgotten or deliberately repressed and eradicated from the mainstream Western view of history? It was easy to imagine how this could have occurred. History was always written by the victors, and the Celts had been on the losing side of conflicts from Roman times onward. The Celts may have been seen as the losers of the Western world, surviving only in the very edges of the Atlantic, where the Romans, Saxons, and Normans had failed to reach them. But I soon realized that their rich culture had not been as mercilessly eradicated as their victors would have us to believe. The spirit of this culture had in fact permeated the very foundations of Western civilization, not politically or economically, but spiritually. The Celts' gift to the Western world was one of magic and imagination. The stories of Arthur and his court were to entrance and enthrall the courts of Europe, and central to these tales was the legend of the Holy Grail. The Grail myth was one that fascinated and confused me in equal amounts. What was this Grail that in some versions was the cup of the Last Supper, and in others an emerald stone fallen from heaven? Whatever its form, its function remained the same. In all myths and retellings, it was something divine, something magical that touched upon the spiritual, a revelation of the holy. Yet, beneath their overtly Christian gloss, these legends were hedged in strangely primal imagery. They told of magical wounds that would not heal, of enchanted vessels that dispensed whatever food was desired. In one myth, in place of the grail, there was a severed head, borne on a bloody silver salver, a throwback to the pagan cult of the head to which Gawain's skull seemed to belong. Was it possible that a connection existed between the sacrifices of Celtic times and this medieval myth? It was this question that ultimately led to the writing of this book. Warriors of the Wasteland is the story of my search for the forgotten rites at the heart of the Grail myth. Not only a quest to uncover the lost beliefs of the Iron Age Celts and reveal what part human sacrifice played in them, but also an attempt to understand how this apparently civilized prehistoric people justified the ceremonial killing of innocent men and women. Because very few details of the pagan religions of the Iron Age Celts survive, the only contemporary sources were compiled by their classical enemies, and their own literature was written after the demise of paganism. Fundamental to the writing of this work has been my attempt to reconstruct Celtic beliefs, a feat akin to reconstructing Christianity using only broken stained glass windows. Of course, such an attempt cannot uncover the full diversity of cults that probably existed throughout the Celtic world any more than ruined church windows can provide information about Catholicism, Protestantism, evangelicalism, Greek Orthodoxy, or any other faith. At its height, the Celtic world, i.e., regions where a Celtic language was spoken, spread from Ireland in the west to Galatia in the east. And yet, because of its latter eclipse under the Roman Empire, the only vernacular Celtic literature to survive in any usable form is that of Ireland and Wales. From the outset, then, my reconstruction is necessarily limited to the Celts of the British Isles, whose rites and myths may well differ from those of the continent. The reconstruction is based on Celtic myth and the latest archaeological research, but also uses comparative myths and religion, especially those of other Indo-European peoples, to fill in the gaps. Much as in Steven Spielberg's film Jurassic Park, frog DNA is used by Indian scientists to bridge the gaps in dinosaur DNA, thus enabling the long-dead beasts to live again. Unlike these scientists, however, my attempt at resurrection has been undertaken not for entertainment, but to provide a glimpse into the world of sacrifice, into the last thoughts of the man in the Cheshire bog, or the long-lost head from Dover Castle. For if we are truly to grasp the meaning of these rites, we have to understand that Celtic myths were not just stories or tales for the fireside, but parts of a living religion with real value to their adherents. We therefore need to take a step into the psychology of the Celts. And this is where previous attempts. We'll stop there. Go back. I think I need to cut there. Yes, we will cut right here. Cut. And we'll restart there. And this is where previous attempts to recover the pagan religions of our ancestors have failed, for they brought with them the modern Western bias that either sees the act of sacrifice as a cruel aberration, with its victims lamentable and unwilling, or glosses over in the hope that the omission will go unnoticed. But in my view, the act of sacrifice was as pivotal to the Celtic religion as the crucifixion is to Christianity. And in neglecting it, scholars have missed the very essence of Celtic paganism. For my research has uncovered that the individual sacrifice died not as scared and unwilling offerings to hungry gods, but as gods themselves, acting as a bridge between the earthly world and that of the divine. The origins of these rites lay in a cult of rebirth and immortality as sophisticated as any found in the classical world. A cult that would in time become the legend of the Grail. John Grigsby, April 2002. Whew, that's a lot. And isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how many even modern neo-pagans overlook the importance of sacrifice? It's like they're afraid of looking at our past and seeing with true eyes. Pagan sacrifice did indeed involve blood. Hell, even as a family traditionalist today, I offer of my own blood frequently to my spiritual allies, to them over there, the good neighbors. Ah. Now let's head on to the prologue. Prologue. The Man in the Well. My hands and face are numb, and although I am wet through, half frozen and breathless from the climb, I feel an enormous sense of exhilaration and, what's more, of homecoming. It is strange to think that the last time I scaled the Tor at Glastonbury, it was midsummer, many years ago, when along with many others I made the heady climb to witness the sunset. On that occasion, I was part of an eclectic congregation of travelers, some of whom, with chanting and drumming, were serenading the dying of the light. Today, however, I am alone, and even the sun to which those many voices were raised is absent, hidden behind the leaden sky of an English winter morning. I seek shelter from the freezing rain in the solitary ruined tower of St. Michael's Church that tops the Tor. Luckily, the rain lashing against the walls in intermittent squalls is unable to penetrate the tower, so the interior is mercifully dry, although dark and otherworldly. The tower is all that remains of the 1360 church, itself the second on the site. Its predecessor fell in an earthquake on the inauspicious date of September 11th, 1275. This act, according to the occultist Dion Fortune, who once lived in a house at the foot of the Tor, signified that here the old gods still held their own. In her 1934 book, Glastonbury, Avalon of the Heart, she states that the Tor had never said, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean." Today, I am inclined to agree. The wind is making an unearthly moaning as it whips through the doorless arches, and I have a sudden fear that lightning might strike the tower, or that I might at any moment be joined by one of Fortune's old gods. This great hill on which I am perched rises out of the Somerset levels like some colossal crouching beast or slumbering giant. Some have seen in the stepped levels that wind about the... Yeah, stop there. Let's try it again. Some have seen in the stepped levels that wind about this hill evidence for a vast prehistoric maze, or in its curvaceous rise the form of a recumbent goddess. Rumor has it that the Tor, a West Country word for hill, is hollow, filled with subterranean chasms and caves, an entrance to the underworld itself. One story tells how a Dark Age hermit, the Welsh Saint Colin, who lived in a cell on the slopes of the strange hill, had once met the king of fairyland and leader of the wild hunt, Gwynap Neath, within the tour. Saint Colin dismissed the infernal king in his palace with a sprinkle of holy water, perhaps taken from the waters of Chalice Well, the Calibite spring that bubbles up in the valley below the Tor, and found himself alone once more on the hillside. I had filled a plastic bottle with the self-same iron-rich water, and taking it now from my rucksack, I unscrew the cap with numb fingers and take a swig of its blood-tasting contents, leaving enough in the bottle to cast about me should the need arise. It is hardly surprising that such pagan presences abound here. Glastonbury, so the legends say, was ancient Avalon, the Apple Isle, a pre-Christian Celtic Elysium to which the wounded Arthur had been brought to be healed by his half-sister, the bewitching Morgan Le Fay. Set in the heart of cider country, this strange hill, once almost an island, no doubt had always struck man as somewhat otherworldly. Quite when it became associated with the Apple Isle of Avalon is not clear, but a connection between Glastonbury and Morgan Le Fay's earthly paradise, derived from a Celtic land of the dead, must have existed before 1191, when Arthur's tomb, a hollowed-out oak coffin containing the skeleton of a man with many wounds and a woman at his feet, was said to have been discovered by monks in the grounds of Glastonbury Abbey. This discovery, which many take to have been a forgery cunningly crafted to boost the Abbey's finances after a disastrous fire, no doubt rested on an already common connection between Arthur and the site. Upon the coffin, according to Gerald of Wales, was an iron cross bearing the words, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur, with Guinevere, his second wife, in the Isle of Avalon." Modern archaeological surveys have revealed that something had definitely been unearthed where the chronicles say the tomb was discovered. So the grave itself, if not the cross, may not have been a forgery. It had perhaps contained the body of some ancient king after all, though whether of Saxon or British stock, it is impossible to say. Whatever the dubious nature of the foundations of the Glastonbury legends, they undoubtedly had power. Glastonbury had fulfilled a need, and continues to do so, it seems, given the number of pilgrims who still tread its hallowed soil. From my place of relative shelter, I wandered over to the eastern doorway and watched the landscape come into focus and then dissolve again into swirling cloud. From this vantage point, some 500 feet or 150 meters above the surrounding levels, it is possible on a fine day to see for many miles. To the north, you can sometimes glimpse the mountains of Wales, and to the south, the earthen ramparts of Cadbury Castle, the Iron Age hill fort reoccupied by the native Britons after the departure of the Roman legions in 410 AD, and that some believe is the famed Camelot of Arthur. I scan the horizon for this landmark, but low-lying cloud prevents any chance of a view. I walk across the tower to the western arch and gaze out over the levels. From here, when the clouds lift, I can just see the crumbling remains of an abbey. Despite the claim that Arthur's grave had been found here, many continued to believe that Arthur was not dead, but merely sleeping under Cadbury Castle's mighty defenses to awake in Britain's hour of need. A myth, no doubt supported by the sense of personality and presence felt at places such as the Tor. The rain ceases. Exiting from the western door, I glance up at the carvings above the archway. Far above me, I can make out an eroded carving of St. Michael, pinning down the dragon with his left foot, symbolizing the victory of light over darkness, or, as many believe, the suppression of the old religion by the new. The powers of darkness, it seems, are winning the battle today, for in the stormy half-light I can barely make out the other carvings. To the left of the doorway I am just able to discern a depiction of Saint Brede milking her cow, commemorating, so I have read, her alleged visit to Glastonbury in 488 AD. And to the right of the door, a curious image of an angel weighing a soul on a set of scales. Here, in the dim light, on a spot many have claimed is the entrance to the other world, it is easy for such meanings to shift and change. To see in the weighing of the soul a connection with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and in Saint Brede, as Dion Fortune states, the Egyptian cow goddess Hathor. Glastonbury can play such tricks with the unwary. The ever-present clouds that course seemingly just yards above my head are of that curious golden gray that often presages snow. And so I make the decision to risk. Ah, see what I mean? It's fun, isn't it? The joys. I know there's a few parts further back and stuff that I missed up on some words. And it happens. This is just my first run through. I will actually probably re-record pretty much all this, but probably not today because my battery life really sucks on this laptop. I so need a new laptop. This thing I've had for quite some time. Anyways, let's see. I gotta go a little further back. Let's see. So there I need to start. Oh, further back. I think it's right there. Yes, right there. The ever-present clouds that course seemingly just yards above my head are of that curious golden gray that often presages snow. And so I make the decision to risk the treacherously muddy descent before I get caught in a blizzard. I take another gulp of the icy water and with a half smile pour the remainder onto the grass beside me. To avoid falling flat on my face, I take a good half hour to retrace my steps to the bottom of the tour. But once down, I am warmed and invigorated. From my destination, Chalice Well Gardens. The promised snow has failed to materialize. The cloud has thinned a little, and my mood has lifted. A handful of people are milling about the lower part of the gardens, amongst the pools and waterfalls, which are stained a rust red from the iron content in the water. But I take the path up the slope to the wellhead, the carved head of a lion from whose mouth the waters pour forth onto a circular slab of stone. I lift the glass placed there and take a sip of water, which maintains a constant temperature of 52 degrees Celsius, then replace the cup and walk up to the well itself. The name Chalice Well is typical of the myth-making qualities of Glastonbury. In fact, it derives from chalk well, but the place has been called Chalice Well ever since it became associated with the Holy Grail, that mysterious cup whose story is embedded deep within Arthurian legends, and which was said to have been brought here by Joseph of Arimathea, and secreted in the depths of the well by the Fisher King. Although the day is still cold, the wind has died down, and overhead patches of blue are appearing through the clouds. At my feet lies Frederick Bly Bond's elaborate well cover, made in 1919. Bond, a contemporary of Dion Fortune, had helped excavate the ruins of the abbey, with the help, so he claimed, of the ghost of one of the monks. On the cover, rendered in black iron, is the Vesica Pisces, in the form of two interlocking circles. It's a good choice for the motif of this place because it symbolizes the blending of opposites, pagan and Christian, this world and other world, ancient and modern, male and female, yin and yang. It sums up Glastonbury, yet also has a deeper meaning. Early Christians used this ancient Pythagorean symbol as a secret sign, for within its design could be discerned a fish, which in Greek was ichthys, a word whose letters were an acronym for Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But the symbol of the fish had had a long and ancient association with the pagan religions preceding Christianity, and had played no small part in the legends of the Grail. Bending down, I lift the well cover and peer into the dark waters below, the same still depths I had peered into 13 years earlier on my first visit to Glastonbury, age 17, half expecting to see the glimmer of a golden vessel concealed here by the Fisher King. Within the well, I can just discern the huge masonry blocks from which it is formed, oriented, according to Dion Fortune, so that the sun shines into its depths as it skirts the Tor on Midsummer's Day. Within the chamber is a man-sized recess in which he believes human victims had been bound in pre-Christian times, their blood mixing with the iron-stained fungus in the water, and their sacred deaths lending power to the visions of the officiating druids, and later of Arthur's half-sister, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay. In fact, this chamber, and the man-sized niche within it, were not built until some 1,000 years after the last druid walked the land, for it was constructed in the Middle Ages, when Glastonbury was a spa town rivaling the popular nearby Bath. No pagan sacrifice had ever taken place in the niche in this well, at least not in Christian times. What happened before this, however, is anyone's guess. It would be easy to scoff at Fortune's error and label her a romantic, a dreamer, and self-deluded mystic. But while looking into these black depths, I am aware that her vision of the man in the well lies chillingly close to the truth. After 13 years of questing, my own answer to the mystery of the Grail is inextricably bound up with such a sacrificial tradition, for, as I discovered in the years following my initial visit here, bodies of sacrificed men have been unearthed from peat bogs, wells, and rivers where they had lain preserved beneath the water. In trying to decipher the meaning of their deaths, I would eventually stumble upon my own elucidation of the Grail myth. It flashes before my eyes now, my own vision of the Grail, the fruit of my long search, in a parade of startling images that take on a life of their own. In the dark before the dawn, emerging from the covering of the wood are two pallid shapes, a pair of milk-white oxen drawing what appears to be a wagon, upon which are seated a bearded young man and a smaller figure, a white-robed woman with flowers entwined about her plaited hair. Following them is a train of men and women, a dozen or so, robed in white and black. Behind them, a silent crowd. The wagon stops, and the man and his companion are led to a boggy clearing beside mist-covered waters. He is stripped naked save for an armband of fur, and then bound. His skin seems to writhe and move with emerald-colored serpentine patterns. Is he painted? Or is this just the effect of the moonlight to the branches upon his bare skin? In the half-light, he looks as if snakes are coiling about his arms, chest, and neck. I gotta stop there because I got a train getting ready to go by. And this is another reason why I am trying so hard for my GoFundMe to replace this temple. It's easier to soundproof. My GoFundMe has already raised $400. We've got a long way to go. I still got to come up to about 3,000 for the shed kit that we are looking at. Or at least have a good amount of financial backing so that I can make payments if payments is possible. But the thing is that, oh, come on, stupid train. Going so slow. Actually, might actually want to go ahead and just redo that part next week, because we're already almost about 50 minutes. I try to do about 50 minutes to an hour. So let's go ahead and save what I have right now. File, save project as. We will do this as Warrior of Wasteland Draft 1. And save. And call it a week. So thank you for being here. Thank you for spending the time. If you wish to donate to the GoFundMe, there's the link right there. Like I said, we've already raised $400. We've got to get to about 3,000. If you want, like I said, these videos are also shared on my Patreon account. And I don't even remember if I left the link for my Patreon. If not, message me somehow and I will put that out there. And until then, join me tomorrow as we continue on with Ankara Gwyn by Robin Artisan. Good stuff. So until then, may you never hunger, may you never thirst, and may the good neighbors always be with you. Blessed be.